Radio buttons allow users to choose only one of several options. This set of radio buttons at the bottom of contact.php in the chapter 10.10_02 folder of the exercise files has three options. Although it's common to set a default value by adding the checked attribute to one of the buttons, it's not obligatory. So if I load this file into a browser, the radio buttons are down at the bottom and no button is selected. And it's only if the user selects one of these options that the radio button group will be included in the post array. If all of the buttons remain deselected, the radio button group will be ignored. So let's switch back to the code to see how to handle a radio button group. All buttons in the same group share the same name attribute. So in this case, the name is gender. And if a button is selected, it's the value of the selected button that's transmitted when the form is submitted. So in this case, we'll be submitting female, male, or won't say if a button has been selected. Let's start by assuming that you don't set a default and that the radio group is not a required field. For the processing script in process_mail.php to be able to handle it, you need to add the name of the radio button group to the expected array. So let's scroll to the top of the page, and the expected array is on line 5, so we need to add a new element to that, which will be gender. That's the name of our radio button group. Because no button has been set as the default, we also need to check whether gender has been included in the post array, and we need to do that before we go to process_mail.php. So let's do that on line 14. We need a conditional statement if not is set, and we're looking for the post array and the gender element. So if it doesn't exist, we'll create it and set it to an empty string. This is necessary because the script in process_mail.php assumes that every input field listed in the expected array will be included in the post array, and if we don't create a default value here, the mail processing script will generate errors. But let's say that a button has been selected, but the form is submitted with errors. So we need to redisplay the form with the correct button selected. So we need to go back down to the radio button group at the bottom of the page, and we need to add a bit of PHP logic in the input tags. So on line 81, just before the closing angle bracket, insert some extra space, and in there we'll have a PHP block. And we need to check if the post array has any elements. So if post, if it has, that means that the form has been submitted. And then we also need to check the value of gender. So we need to compare it with this value here, so that's female. If it is, we need to echo checked. We get this gender variable from the mail processing script. Originally it's post gender, but the mail processing script will convert this into a simpler variable. So that's where gender comes from. We need to do the same in the other radio buttons, so copy those lines of code, and then in the other radio button input elements, just paste that in, and this time we're checking to see if the value is male. And then in the last one, we need to check that the value is won't say. It's got an apostrophe in it, so we need a double quoted string. Let's just copy that and replace this here. So if we save that and then go back to the browser, and I'm going to fill in my name, but I'm going to ignore comments because that's a required field, and my gender is male. Click send comments. We get the error message here, but the value of male has been preserved, so that's working fine. But let's say I want to make the radio group a required field, but I still don't want it to have a default value. So let's go back to the editing program, and at the top here we need to add gender into the required array on line 6. And then we also need to add an error message to the radio button group. So scroll down to the radio button group, and we'll put the error message here in the legend on line 79. So inside there, we'll create a PHP block. And in that PHP block, we need a conditional statement. So if, I want to see if the missing array has got any elements in it. And we also want to see if gender is in that missing array. So in array, the value that we're looking for, which is gender, and then the array where we're searching for it, that's the missing array. So we'll have a colon at the end there. Then inside the legend, we'll have an HTML span with the class warning, and please select the value. And then after that, we need another PHP block. Close our conditional statement. Now end if, followed by a semicolon. And if we save that, go back to the browser, and we need to refresh the page. So we'll do that. I'll add my name, and then ignore everything else. Click Send Comments, and it tells me now, please select a value. But if I select a value and submit, then that message goes away. So that's a couple of scenarios, but let's say you want to set a default value. Let's choose rather not say as the default. So go back to the editing program, and it involves just a slight change to a conditional statement. So let's go down to won't say. Here, instead of if post and gender equals won't say, we'll change this to and if not post. So in other words, the form hasn't been submitted, and we change this to or instead of and. So two vertical pipes, and then it will echo checked. So let's just save that, go back to the browser, refresh the page, and rather not say is now selected. But if we try this again, put my name in there, I'll select male, send comments, and it has selected the correct radio button. So that deals with several different scenarios of using radio button groups in this web processing form. And the good thing about it is that all of the code in process_mail.php remains unchanged. That already handles things like multiple choice elements such as radio button groups.